Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up podcast. I'm your host, Bannon Crowley, and I'm here with my co-host, Colin Martin.
How's it going?
And we got a lot to talk about today. We'll talk about the conclusion of the NBA semifinals, and we'll talk about the Eastern and Western Conference finals, and we will also talk about the NBA lottery, which happened last night as of our recording. So we'll just dive into the lottery first, since that's the first thing on a lot of people's minds. If you didn't know, the San Antonio Spurs ended up winning the lottery last night. So it looks like they'll be drafting Victor Wembanyama with the first overall pick, unless something crazy happens. So I guess just some initial thoughts about this. I think that out of all the coaches available, this is his best case scenario. And also, we've seen all the ties between France and San Antonio with Manu Ginobili and some other players throughout that timeline. So I think for Victor, this was probably the top spot he was looking for. So good for him to go there and to be able to develop with Pop. And also another thing that I wanted to talk about, I haven't really seen anyone talk about it yet, but I think this completely changes Pop's coaching trajectory, because if he doesn't get Victor or even Scoot, if they get like a top 5 pick and it's not one of them, then I don't know how much longer he really has. But now this gives him another chance to be able to go on, I would say, like a final run, depending on how long we get to see from him. But obviously he's getting up there in age. So if he didn't get Victor, very different at 74 years old. But I still think he's got a good while to go now, and he has a motivation to keep going.
Yeah, I want to shout out my Argentinians, Manu Ginobili. Don't want to disrespect him, but Tony Parker, he's had those
Tony
French
Parker,
connections in the
yeah.
past. Yeah, but anyways, to keep it going forward, I agree with what you're saying. I expected Pop to kind of be out after, this year or the next one. But if Victor is truly the player that we expect him to be, I think Pop is going to have to, stick around for more of his career. I think this puts the Spurs team on a different, trajectory. And I'm interested to see what they're going to do with the rest of their team, because in my head, these were the perfect guys to get Scoot Henderson. You get this point guard, but you don't expect to get the number 1 pick when you go in the lottery. And now that Victor's in their hands, that's where they have to go. It's an interesting situation. And I think to mention Charlotte, who got the 2nd pick. I mean, Charlotte getting Scoot Henderson next to LaMelo Ball. I mean, that would be the perfect scenario for both of them to develop. But Charlotte's got to figure out what else they have going on. I think the draft lottery is really fun. I think this draft in particular is really weird because it has some depth in the later rounds, but we don't even know who's going to go 3rd. It's definitely not one of the most, well thought out drafts ever. I think there's a lot of guys coming from a lot of different places and a lot of different competition levels. So we are going to see guys fly up and down the board. I mean, I look at the Thompson brothers. I look at Brandon Miller. I look at a guy like Taylor Hendricks out of UCF. I mean, these are guys that may not have even been, top draft prospects to some, months ago. And now they're projected to go top 5 range. It's an interesting draft for sure.
Yeah. I would say there's a lot of people that are concerned with the fit with Scoot in Charlotte that I've seen, but I think they'll be able to figure it out. LaMelo can definitely play off the ball. We saw what he did this year with Terry Rozier, being able to play, as Terry Rozier is pretty ball heavy oriented. And I think that just means that Terry Rozier is gone at this point. There's really no need for him to stay. But I don't think that's bad for Charlotte. They're going to be having one of the brightest 2 guard combinations at this point. And I believe in both these guys. I'm not sure if I'm completely sold on Victor yet. I'll have to wait and see. But I still think, obviously, he's a very good talent overall, looking at him on paper. But I don't know. I've watched some of his plays. Obviously, it's very impressive, but we'll have to see how it translates to the NBA level and what goes on with that. I guess some of my concerns, too, are the same concerns that I had about Chet Holmgren. We didn't get to see him play this year, but I think Victor, a lot more solid of a prospect than him, being able to shoot the 3 ball pretty well. So we'll have to see how he does. A lot of interesting names that we could see, especially the top 5 that will go down. Shout out to the Thompson twins. Amen Thompson, my favorite player in this draft. We'll see what happens with him, especially with the Rockets too. Expecting, if they don't get James Harden, could see them go with a guard in the draft. We don't know what's going to happen until draft night to this point. There's a lot of good players in the top of this draft, but I don't know. Like you said, the depth in this draft isn't that crazy.
Yeah. And Tatum is barking a little bit. She sounds angry, but it's interesting to look at. I'm going to be coming out with a video on the channel doing my mock draft post lottery, and there are some guys that are truly in that end of the first round range who may not even sneak into the draft in total. It's very interesting. There's a lot of moving pieces in this one, so I think the lottery is a fun first step, but we're gonna have to wait and see after this.
Yeah. So next up, the first semifinals that we saw conclude was the Sixers and the Celtics, as we saw the Celtics win in Game 7. As of this recording, you guys will have hopefully watched my video on the future of the Sixers at this point. So I don't have too much to say on this. I talked a lot about it in that video, but just disappointing overall from the Sixers. Obviously at this point, firing Doc Rivers too. Jayson Tatum going out there and having the best game of his career, circumstances wise, and just overall dominated. This was one of those games where you look at in a player's career that changes the trajectory of him. If he went out there and played bad and just kept shooting poorly and they lost the game, the Celtics have a lot of questions going into the offseason, but he didn't do that. And now they have a prime chance to make the finals. And depending on who they go against in the finals coming out of the West, it could either be a favorable matchup or a one where it'll be very interesting to see what happens. But yeah.
Sorry, I mean, just step in on that. This was big for us. I'm a big Celtics fan. Betting's a big Sixers fan. And as I came on here a couple weeks ago, or last week, I should say, and talked about how Celtics fans got to stop blaming Tatum. He's the only reason that he's been in a lot of games. And then Game 6, it almost felt like I was proven wrong with his horrible performance. And then to see him show out in Game 7 and, be the Jayson Tatum that I think a lot of Celtics fans expect him to be, it was definitely a good feeling. I know it was tough. I know Philadelphia played themselves into a hole, but you still can't discount, Tatum's performance. As you mentioned, it's big. It's big career-wise. And, the Celtics are going to get Miami as we're recording. First games tonight. And that's not going to be an easy matchup either. I think I don't want to jump into it too soon. I know you have a video talking about what's next for the Sixers, but if you want to give us like a little like Spark Notes version of that, what do you think the Sixers are going to do? How do they bounce back from getting knocked out of the second round again?
So as we talk about this, Daryl Morey just came out. He had a press conference too, talking about kind of the future of what's going on. James Harden, they can't talk to him yet, and they don't know what his player option will be. So that'll be an interesting situation to go through. Obviously, a lot of coaches that they want to talk to, probably like 5 to 10 different guys that they kind of have on their radar right now. Mike D'Antoni kind of came out as the first guy who was big. But Daryl Morey talking today, he said he wants to focus more on a guy that knows how to run the system through the players that they have. And that's kind of the one point that I emphasized a lot in the video. I think they should be able to get a coach who knows how to run through a big, because there's a lot of teams that run through a point guard, and that is very different compared to running through a big, just fit wise and system wise too. It's a completely different version of play. If you have a point guard that's really good, that's how Mike D'Antoni and the Rockets had success, because James Harden ran the same exact play and was dropping 36 points a game. That's pretty easy to run a system through. But when you run a system through Joel Embiid, you have to play it a lot differently. So some guys up there, that would be an option. Nick Nurse, I think Bud, if we're talking about fit wise, running through a big, is probably the best option. And Monty Williams, who I said was my number one option in the video overall. Any of those three guys would be great to see. And I'm not worried about Joel Embiid. Daryl Morey came out and said that he believes completely that Tyrese Maxey could be one of the best players in the league and has the room to develop. And I still think that he could be able to develop into one of the best two options in the league overall. I feel like I'm a lot higher on him than most people, but I still think that he has immense talent, and Tobias Harris is going to be there. There's no getting rid of him. And this team, even without James Harden, Obviously, they'll have to retool and everything, but I still think even if James Harden leaves today, that roster without changing anything is still a top 4 seed in the East. Maybe it's the 4th seed, but that's without retooling everything. They have a good core there. I still think Tobias Harris can be a valuable player, as we saw in the playoffs. And they got to figure it out with James Harden. I think they should bring him back on a 2-year deal, essentially. You can't go out and give him a max, but even if they end up doing a sign and trade with a team like Phoenix to get a guy like Chris Paul back, I still think that would benefit them. Just overall, you need to be able to get a guy, essentially a guard. You don't really want to go out there, especially with Tobias Harris, and whether PJ Tucker stays or not. Even if Tobias Harris slides into that 4, I feel more comfortable with trying to go out there and get a guard, whether it's going all in to try to get Dame. Even if he doesn't want to go, you at least have to try the option to see if he would want to go there.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think the future for the Sixers is a bit up in the air. I think, I really advise you should see Banning's video coming out if you want to get the full details. But to talk about the future of the Celtics, my team, it's the Miami Heat right now. It seems like it comes to this every year that the Celtics' future comes in the hands of a series with the Miami Heat. So this is not the same Heat that the Celtics may have matched up with in years past. This is an 8th seed on a miraculous run. But if you look at the team, it's pretty much the same squad. And the biggest factor is that they still have Eric Spoelstra, and he knows how to coach against the Celtics. So, looking ahead to that series, you expect Jayson Tatum to continue playing pretty hot. You expect Jaylen Brown to, catch a groove a little bit. But even with all that being said, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo always have good series against the Celtics. They always show out. So I wanted to ask you, do you have some early predictions for this series, game 1 tonight?
Yeah, I think the Heat can sneak one away at home, but I think the Celtics should win this series pretty easily. Speaking of guys, it's going to depend on how Jayson Tatum wants to play. But Jaylen Brown has been the most consistent player on this team, especially in the playoffs. In that series, he dropped 23, 25, 23, 23, 24, 25, and a low of 17. And you'll take that. They still won the game. And even in the first round, he hasn't dropped less than 15 points in a game. And the game there, he dropped 15. He went 7 for 15. So he still shot well. So he's been the most consistent guy. It just depends on which Jayson Tatum wants to show up. I think it's interesting to look at Jimmy Butler. Like you said, they're still the same team. But if we're looking at another similar scenario in these playoffs, the Warriors were essentially the same team. But last year, completely different scenario. Last year for the Heat, completely different scenario coming into this. Last year, they were the number 1 seed at this time in the Eastern Conference Finals. And they still got beat by the Celtics. I think the Celtics took, I would say, a step up overall. I think even though they made the finals last year, they've been a little shaky this year. But I still think overall the players individually took a step up. And as long as they can make the adjustments, because we know Eric Spoelstra is going to make adjustments throughout this series. So at the end of the day, I still think the Heat are a good team, but the Celtics should win this series pretty easily. Jimmy Butler will do what he does, but this team is built to be a championship contender. And if you don't make it to the finals this year, and even if you don't win this year, it's been a long time where they've been around that Eastern Conference or finals edge. So you have to get over the hill, because there's been questions asked every single year. So the Celtics really, they're in a spot where obviously you look at teams where they're not doing very well for a while. That's a bad spot to be in, but sometimes it's almost worse if you're just in the finals every year and you just can't get it done. So I think the Celtics this year have the best chance that they've had since last year. So you got to get it done this year if you're the Celtics.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think you could honestly say that about every team left in the playoffs right now. So it's an interesting thing. Obviously, Jokic coming off 2 straight MVPs. Nuggets haven't made it. Lakers, they got the bubble ring, but since then they've been super shaky and they're finally on an up. And then the Heat haven't been able to convert while making the finals in the Eastern Conference Finals either. It's an interesting scenario for sure. I've seen the Celtics do this before. it's less of a gut feeling thing and more of a I know how these things usually go sort of deal. I think the Heat are worse than the Heat they saw last year, but I still think this is a series that goes to 6 games. Miami at home is great against Boston, and we saw Philly go into TD Garden last series and catch a couple games. Miami has been notorious for doing that, so I think 6 is about the range I'd be fair to put it in. Uh, like you said, on paper, the Celtics should blow them out of the water. I mean, this should be 4-0, but just based on what we've seen on the past and how well we've seen, especially Jimmy and a lot of those other Heat role players play this playoffs, I think 6 is fair. It's going to be an interesting series. I think this might have more fireworks than the series we'll see out west, which we can cut to right now if you want.
Yeah. So I guess my question though, coming off of that,
Yeah,
if you think the Heat can win at home, do you feel confident that the Celtics can go? Because if they're winning in 6, they'd be winning in Miami in game
yeah,
6.
absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, Miami has a good home atmosphere, especially in the playoffs. I understand that. But the same way, I just mentioned all the nice things about the Heat, the way they can win in TD Garden. The Celtics can win in Miami too. It's not something that they haven't done before. I know it's difficult, but it goes both ways on this. I mean, both of these teams have exceptional players and they've played each other so many times. They've definitely felt each other out. I think both teams are capable of beating each other on the road. But I think another reason why the Heat keep it, I think to 6 instead of like a sweeper 5 game series is that, Coach Spo has been up against the Celtics in the playoffs. It feels like every year now. And although the Celtics have seen them and some of the Celtics players may be more experienced, this is a series where maybe a guy like Joe Mazzulla isn't as confident opposed to if we still had Brad Stevens or if Ima Udoka was running it back another year. So I think the Heat will push it to 6. But with that being said, I'm confident the Celtics will win. I think calling it in 6 is just giving credit to a Heat team that's given Boston trouble in years past.
Yeah. So speaking about the next series that we'll talk about is the Warriors and Lakers. We saw the Lakers end up winning that series. A question that we talked about last week, which was kind of up in the air, if we thought the Warriors dynasty was done. We've had some more time to digest that. And I think, like you said last week, you've said it for a while now, but it seems like the Warriors just keep coming back. I feel pretty confident at this point. That I don't think they'll be able to get back to a championship or win a championship at this point. There's so much going on in the West right now. And we just saw another team be able to retool in the Spurs, who, if Victor's the guy that we're talking about, then they could be getting back into the playoff picture. Obviously, there's a bunch of young teams too. We'll have to see what happens. If James Harden goes back to the Rockets, they could fight for a play-in spot. A lot of teams with young players, and the Warriors just keep getting older. Question marks with Jordan Poole, Klay Thompson, who depends on what we get from him. He could either be the game 6 Klay like we saw this series, where he went 0 for 60 almost, it seemed like, to just not make a shot at the end of that series, looking like James Harden. But they're just, I don't know. The Warriors, Steph Curry, I still think is a top 5 player in the NBA. But it's really hard when he's not getting any help, when he's used to getting, I wouldn't say getting carried, but he's getting the help that he needs to win a championship like we saw last year. So it's going to be interesting what happens with Steph Curry. I feel like he would be one of those guys where I wouldn't be surprised if he retired before he fizzled out. I can't really see Steph Curry being a 15 points per game scorer at age 40 and just sticking around. I feel like he knows his value and what he's done in the league. So I don't think he's retiring now, obviously, but I still think, I don't know how much longer he really has. This Warriors team does have a lot of young players too, but especially with Draymond Green being so vocal about potentially leaving and going to play with his favorite person of all time, LeBron James. So we'll have to see what happens. I think Steve Kerr said it perfectly. If Draymond leaves, we're not a contender anymore. And I completely agree with that. Draymond's impact overall on the game, stat sheet wise, I mean, if you look at it, it's not amazing sometimes, but it's Draymond Green. The guy is, like, when I think of the Warriors, he is one of the guys, if not the guy. He's the most vocal person on the court all the time. He's the biggest part of why this big three has been able to stay together. he's the guy on the sidelines when things are going wrong. He's going to be the one to speak up about it and talk about it. So if he leaves, this Warriors team is completely different. And I don't really know what they do, because we've talked about how they've struggled with big so much, and they were supposed to figure it out in the draft and they clearly haven't. So I think this Warriors dynasty is done. They're still they were the dynasty of the 2010s. I guess at the end of the 2010s after Miami was, but if this is the end of the dynasty, great overall. And I feel pretty confident that Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Draymond will all make the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you brought up a really good point that I'm going to bounce off of. We're starting to see the impact of not drafting well, even when you're a great team. Sometimes we talk about, these teams that get like luxury picks. Like when we talk about the NFL, the Chiefs get these like picks that they can just let sit because they're so dominant all the time, whatever. But in the NBA, it doesn't really work like that with less players. And even though you are a great team, you need to continue to draft well, because your guys are going to get old and you're going to need to jolt these younger guys into starting roles. I mean, I'm the Warriors. At this point, you would hope that Jordan Poole and Jonathan Kuminga could be starters on your team, right? It's about time where they would start normally, and neither of them have developed into a role where I think you can start them. I understand Jordan Poole is a really good six-man type off the bench. I like that. But, and I know you're a fan of Kuminga, but he's still raw right now. I mean, we're at a point where, I love Draymond. I know he is the Warriors guy, but just where his age is at and where his contract is at, we shouldn't be at a point where the Warriors need to resign him to compete. It feels strange. And I feel like if the Kuminga project worked, if the James Wiseman project worked, and if Jordan Poole, I know he has started, but if he was a bona fide starter, the Warriors wouldn't have to worry about this stuff. They would roll with an older Steph and these young guys and still compete. But I just don't think we can see that. And I think that's why I will finally say I think the dynasty is over. I mean, it gets to a point, who are they going to beat in the West? I mean, this Jokic Nuggets team is only getting better, and they have all these good guys under contract. I mean, the Suns have a whole offseason to figure it out. You mentioned teams that are young that are keep getting better, Spurs, Rockets. I mean, these teams are all going to compete with the Warriors, and the Warriors just keep running it back, and the guys get older. When you're a championship team winning the chip, run it back as many times as you want. But when you're a sixth seed that gets bumped in the second round, I mean, what are you running it back for at a point? And I understand the Warriors shouldn't kick a whole rebuild. They don't have the pieces for that, and you still have Steph Curry competing at the highest level. You can't do a rebuild, but I think it's fair to say they'd be better off retooling. I mean, honestly, I love Klay Thompson. I know you don't want to break up the Splash Bros, but if you get value for him, it's worth it. Same for a guy like Wiggins. I mean, they don't have the other pieces along with Curry. I mean, excuse me, we called them out in this playoffs because this is a team that says they're going to win a chip. They're playing Damian Lee, and they're playing, all these other guys. They're playing, I don't even know, Moses Moody, another project that hasn't really worked out for them yet. So it just confuses me. I think that this team, I don't think they're going to be bad next year. I think they'll be a playoff team, but eventually you're going to have to switch up your mentality, especially if I'm Steve Kerr. I mean, you can only rely on the same core group of guys to bring you to a finals so many years in a row. And it's going to be 2024 next year. This whole Steph Curry era started in like 2014, 2015. It's been a long time. So I don't know. I think the project is a little played out, if I can be honest. I think it's time where the Warriors, hot streak might finally turn cold.
Yeah. One thing I want to bring up too is the 2020 draft, where they drafted James Wiseman number 2 overall, and they would end up winning a championship 2 years later. So you look at that, and a lot of people forgot that they drafted that high because Steph Curry was hurt that year, and pretty much they were running with a G League roster at one point. And I think the main issue with that is if you're drafting that high, even though you're expecting to be a contender for the next years after that, you don't draft James Wiseman in that spot. The NBA draft is different than every other draft. The NFL draft, you draft for position because there's so many good players overall. In the NBA draft, you have to, if you're that high, you have to take the best player available, and you figure it out after that. If they took LaMelo Ball, this is a completely different team that we're talking about. You feel comfortable with even if Klay Thompson leaves. Steph Curry and LaMelo Ball, that's a completely different guard duo than we're looking at right now. So obviously, I mean, even after that, I know Patrick Williams hasn't been the greatest player, not what the Bulls were expecting. Isaac Okoro after that, Onyeka Okongwu, Killian Hayes, who has been awful, Obi Toppin. I mean, even if you take Tyrese Halliburton, who fell all the way to 12, it's completely different from, I know they didn't want to draft a guard, but you're looking at guys in this draft too. Like, I feel more Cole Anthony would still bring more to this team than James Wiseman, who's not even on the team anymore. So I mean, even Peyton Pritchard too. Maybe not Peyton Pritchard,
Yeah,
but
maybe not Peyton Pritchard.
I mean, the idea that I understand what they're trying to do. I was a big fan of James Wiseman. It just didn't really work out with the team overall. So the Warriors are in this weird spot where they don't really know what they're going to do. So we'll have to see what they do in the offseason, whether they go out, because they're a big market. Players want to play with Steph Curry. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go out there and try to trade for a big, like, I guess one option they could go for is if they try to trade for a guy like DeRozan or a guy of that caliber who can help them win. I still think you can get some value, even if you don't trade Klay. Jordan Poole, I know he wasn't great in the playoffs, but there's a lot of teams that would look at Jordan Poole and want that value just because he's so young still, and he's proven that he can be a good player. So you still have some value that you can trade, especially off the bench. And even if it takes like 30 trades where you trade around some 1-stars with a second round pick to get a 2-star player, maybe they just need Kenny to go in there and help rebuild this team.
That's a good point. I think your draft point was great because we all knew LaMelo Ball was a top 2 prospect in that draft, and the Warriors decided to get a center because they don't have one. But you got to take the other guard. If we're talking about Curry, LaMelo, Klay, I don't even care who's in the front court. Of course, they're still competing.
Those
So
three with Kayvon Looney and Draymond Green is still better
that's a
than.
that's a championship team. But you could give me worse players in the front court for all I care. Like that's a team that's competing. So it's definitely an interesting scenario. I think you made a great point there. But yeah, this Warriors team, they're in an interesting position. It's a position we haven't seen them in a long time at this point.
Yeah, and LaMelo Ball should have been drafted in that spot. I've been yelling from the mountaintop since LaMelo Ball was in 8th grade that he would be a great player, and the Warriors fell off, so that's their fault. But going on to a team that drafted a Ball with the 2nd pick overall, we're going to talk about the Lakers up next, who just played against the Nuggets last night, down by almost 20 at halftime, but end up forcing their way back in, losing the game in the end, but builds a lot more confidence than it would have had if they lost by 20. Jokic ended up dropping 34, 21 and 14. And then on the opposite end, we saw Anthony Davis drop 40, 10 with 3 steals and 2 blocks. And I mean, besides Anthony Davis, LeBron James, and Austin Reeves, and I guess Rui off the bench was good, but no one else was really good on the Lakers overall. And the one guy that we highlighted before this series, Bruce Brown, put 16 off the bench for the Nuggets. And if he plays like that, it's going to be really hard for this Lakers team to win, especially considering every single player on the Nuggets starting lineup dropped at least 12 or more. So looking at this game, obviously Jokic was dominant in this game overall, scoring wise, rebounding, passing the ball. But the Lakers, a second half team all year, were able to fight their way back in the second half. And Darvin Ham actually made some adjustments, surprisingly. I don't know if it was him. I'm just going to give the credit to LeBron. I think LeBron probably made the adjustments. I don't really believe that Darvin Ham did. But one very interesting adjustment when I was looking at it, watching the game, was putting Rui Hachimura on Jokic. But statistically, at the end of the game, it worked. And interesting to look at, but the Lakers come back. They were down 14 to end the 3rd quarter too. So losing this game by 6, it was more of a free throw 6. It was like a 3-point game. And then LeBron missed a shot that I don't know if he should have taken or not. I guess if it goes in, it's a different story, but Lakers getting a little more confidence out of this, even though Jokic goes off completely. I still think the Lakers, obviously losing by 6 and almost getting a chance to win the game at one point builds a lot more confidence.
Yeah, I think the Lakers found out that it's actually not best for them to put AD on Jokic. Really, any of those other rotational big men they have, they're better off guarding Jokic so AD can play free safety in the paint and go up and block shots. I mean, in the most pivotal part of the Lakers run, we see AD block the hell out of a Jokic little baby hook. And that's what sparks them. So if you leave AD in positions to get more blocks, we know he's such a great defensive player. It's putting him in, a better chance for success. I've come on here and I've said it a billion times. I think the Nuggets are going to own this series. My official prediction was Nuggets in 5. And instead of just talking crap about the Lakers, I'm actually going to come and say like some things I think they can do where they could beat the Nuggets because this team is capable. It's not a bad team. I mean, they've exceeded my expectations all year. So I really think we're going to need to see, I don't want to say more because he's already done so much, but I want to see some different stuff out of LeBron. I mean, as we're watching the game live, we don't want LeBron shooting the last shot. How wild is that, So I think LeBron needs to do a better job of just getting to his spots. I mean, obviously the Nuggets know to go after him and target him as LeBron James, but LeBron James has been, the greatest by getting to his spots and being comfortable in the playoffs. He looked a little bit rushed last game. I think we get a more like calm and confident LeBron bouncing off the way that AD is playing right now. This is not an easy Nugget series. I also think you gotta get more people involved for your role players when it comes to shooting. I think Rui was great. I think Austin Reeves was great, but nobody else on that Lakers team had a good shooting performance from outside to me. I mean, I wasn't impressed with D'Angelo. Lonnie Walker, I know we got some minutes, but nothing ridiculous. So you need those other guys. They don't have to be all-stars, but just good shooting performances from more than one person. Because it got to a point at the end of the game where, all right, Austin Reeves is hitting everything, but now the Nuggets are just going to charge Austin Reeves, and what are you going to do? So I think the Lakers, if they can get involvement from everybody and LeBron can just honestly just cool out a little bit, we saw the second half Lakers. I mean, they're scary. They almost took down this Nuggets team that I really think is almost untouchable. So it's going to be exciting for the series. I think the Lakers are going to figure it out. I say Lakers in 5. I think 5 is the minimum. I think this Lakers team is definitely going to catch a game. So it's going to be exciting to see how the series goes. I won't go too much about Jokic. I think he's incredible. I think that was one of the best playoff games we've seen in a long time. I don't think people will talk about that, but that's just an incredible performance. And, the Nuggets squeak out game 1 after being up pretty much the whole game.
Yeah. Interesting thing that you said, Lakers in 5.
Nuggets of 5. Nuggets of 5.
Okay. Yeah.
Nuggets of
Just
5.
making
Nuggets of
sure.
5. No.
Yeah. So one
Incorrect.
guy that you said you kind of scraped over, I'll talk about him a little bit more, but D'Angelo Russell going 4 for 11 and a minus 25 plus minus, just terrible from the game. Like you need to get a lot more out of him in the end than that. He can't be dropping 8 points for you and being that bad. If he's taking 11 shots in 26 minutes and Dennis Schroeder's taking 3 shots in 32 minutes, what is Schroeder doing on the floor? He's just running around too. He didn't really do as much. So you need some involvement from those guys too. Jared Vanderbilt getting pushed to the bench. I like that idea, especially if you're going to have Rui come in late game and be able to play defensively, which he played pretty well defensively in the end. So I think if the Lakers lose this game, if they continue that pace that they had in the first half and lose this game by 20, I think it's completely different. But to see how bad D'Angelo Russell played and being able to still be within the game and essentially be in striking distance for the fourth quarter after coming back down 13 at the start of the quarter is pretty good confidence for the Lakers. Both of these teams have been amazing at home overall, and the Lakers haven't lost at home since I think March like 20 something, and the Nuggets haven't lost at home in the playoffs at all. So if the Lakers could take a game, if they could take game 2 in Denver, that would be a completely different swing to this series. But even if they lose, I still think they could probably figure it out at home, especially if Anthony Davis continues to play this way. If they're going to force Jokic to pass the ball out too, I'm sure the shooters on the Nuggets will be good, but we know what will happen. Jamal Murray could be amazing. Michael Porter Jr. can be good, but he can also be very bad too. We've seen Michael Porter Jr. have those games. So I think if you're the Lakers, before this series, I predicted Lakers in 6, and I'll stick with my prediction. I don't want to bet against LeBron's, and especially after what I think it was KCP said last night. He said that LeBron's just Jokic but can jump higher. I think LeBron's going to drop 60 points next game, because we've seen this story before with Dylan Brooks last series, saying that he's only going to respect him when he gives him 40. So then he gave him 20 and 20 and then beat him by 40. So we'll see if LeBron goes into lay legacy mode in the next game.
I want to talk about KCP a little bit because I don't think that's disrespectful at all. I mean, I understand, but I understand LeBron's like GOAT and Jokic is, people have their feelings about him, but Jokic was second in MVP voting and KCP was played with LeBron in the past. And, to my knowledge, actually had a pretty good relationship with LeBron before LeBron traded him out. I mean, if you're saying LeBron is the most recent MVP and then the second in MVP voting this year, but can jump higher, is more athletic, I'd say that's a compliment. I mean, and I think they do play similar. I actually kind of like that comparison because LeBron can go into scoring mode, he can get buckets, but at the end, he's just an elite playmaker and passer, and he makes his teammates look so much better. I'd say similar stuff about Jokic. With that being said, more I want to talk about with KCP is that it relates to the Lakers too, because why is Dennis Schroeder playing? Why is he starting? I understand he's a good player, but it makes no sense to me because you have a guy like Lonnie Walker on your bench who is he can score in small bunches, but he is a long defensive shooting guard that can play defense. Why is he not matched up on KCP? Dennis Schroeder matches up on KCP and looks lost. I'm seeing Caldwell Pope shoot wide open threes off Jokic dimes, and it's like Schroeder's not even in the same area code sometimes. D'Angelo Russell struggled, but he is the team's point guard. You're going to have to play through his struggles sometimes. But Dennis Schroeder, I mean, you have better options for the personnel you're going against on your bench. And I give Darvin Ham credit for adjusting to the Jokic thing. But if you can adjust to Jokic, why can't you adjust to KCP? It frustrates me a little bit. I know Schroeder deserves minutes. I know he's a good player, but he is not a good matchup for him. And I think that's what let the Nuggets get a big enough lead in the first half where they can crumble in the fourth quarter and still win. It feels like you expect more. And, I'm not the coach, I'm not the GM, but I feel like Ham has pieces to combat this Nuggets team that he's not using enough. That's just how I feel about the defensive, settings that Ham has up in this series.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking at this too, if the Nuggets are running Jokic, Michael Porter, and Aaron Gordon, I think next game you sub Dennis Schroeder, put him to the bench, and put Rui in. I feel like we saw defensively that it works. So that opens up a lot of possibility too for AD to stay in the paint, like you said earlier, and be able to block the shots. And obviously Rui can score the ball, and he's been good in the playoffs so far. And even if Dennis Schroeder's only going to shoot 3 shots and Rui went 8 for 11, I'm going to take Rui out there taking 11 shots. If he's going to shoot, then let him shoot in the lineup. I'm not worried about D'Angelo Russell. He'll figure it out. And even if he doesn't, I mean, if he's in the starting lineup with Rui and Rui's hot, Austin Reeves, LeBron, and AD, it's almost like he would be the 5th option at that point, depending on if Rui's hot or not. So I still think the Lakers, after watching that game, you still have some hope, definitely. I think they'll be able to figure it out, especially once they go back home. So it'll be interesting, especially, I guess my sentiment of them winning in 6 is I think if they get up 3-2 and they go home in LA for game 6, I think they can close it out just because they've been so dominant at home. But if the Nuggets continue this streak of winning at home, it would be very hard for the Lakers to win this series, considering that the Nuggets have home court advantage.
Yeah, and I have Nuggets in 5 because I don't think the Lakers can get up 3-2 on this team. It would have to be, for the Lakers to come back, it would have to be some ridiculous comeback that we've seen LeBron do before. I don't want to say 3-1, but that feels about right. And I just don't think I think the Nuggets are a tougher opponent than LeBron has seen in a long time, before the finals. So I don't know. Yeah, I got Nuggets in 5. I'll make it clear. I do not have the Lakers in this, but we talked about adjustments the Lakers can make, and maybe push it to 6, push it to 7, and once you get LeBron pushing series to 6 or 7, who knows what could happen. So it's gonna be fun to watch, 100%.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of wraps it up for this episode. We'll definitely have more next week on some of these series. I would assume that we would be to game 3 or 4 in both of these series. I don't know exactly logistically wise, but we should be able to have more of a picture of what's going on at that point. We'll be able to see how the start of the Lakers and Heat series goes and how the Lakers and Nuggets series advances. And maybe we'll have more of a clear picture of who we'll see in the finals, and maybe we won't. Maybe it'll be back and forth in both of the series. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that one. But with that being said, we'll see you next week.
See you guys.